Welcome, everyone. This is your host, Adam Coleman. I'm a certified divorce lending professional with the Divorce Lending Association. And with me today, I have Kelly Myers, who is both a divorce coach and a mediator and founder of First Steps Divorce. This podcast series is really designed to help divorcing spouses become more informed about their options. So we're going to go through, talk a little bit more about mediation, talk a little bit more about divorce coaching. So I'm excited to have Kelly here. So Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I love being able to talk with other divorce professionals and be able to inform people how to do divorce better.
Perfect. Well, now I'm glad because you have two different hats in the ring here, so it's good to have that experience and kind of play off each other just to see, where things fit in. I think ultimately people don't fully understand a lot of the different aspects of divorce and what roles people have and the different team members. So I think this will be great. But jumping into that, what inspired you originally to even go down this path into divorce coaching and to mediating?
I think like a lot of people who get into this field, I experienced my own divorce back in 2011. 2011 was when it was initiated and we finalized in 2012. At that time, I had three young kids that were 6, 8, and 10. And there were a lot of things that I regret to this day in terms of choices and decisions I made with regard to the division of assets and debts, things that I agreed to with regard to support that I couldn't change, and things related to the timeshare, or as we refer to, custody when it comes to kids. So I had a lot of regrets and I didn't have any guidance. And I think that was looking back, if I had taken advantage of the guidance that's out there, I probably would have made better decisions. So all of that, I just kept feeling like there's got to be a better way to do this. And so that's initially where I stumbled upon divorce coaching. And then from there, got into doing mediation and then really working in the co-parenting realm as well.
Nice. Can you maybe speak a little bit about your role more on the divorce coaching side? Like what does that activity look like? How do you frame that engagement with a client? Are there specific activities that you're doing? Are there specific pieces of homework that you're kind of giving them afterwards? What does that look like day to day?
I wish I could give you kind of a roadmap of what it looks like to work with a divorce coach, but the reality of it is that every client has different needs.
Right.
And so it's different based upon the client. What I will tell you generally as a divorce coach, the best way to describe what I do is it's almost like I'm a consultant. I help people navigate waters they've never been in before. Most people haven't been through a divorce, and even if they have, it was a while ago. It's a whole different situation, usually different assets, maybe kids where before there wasn't kids. So situation has changed. And so I'm really here to help them navigate this process in a way that they are making informed and strategic decisions. So what does that really mean? For me, typically, and not always with all clients, depends on what their needs are, but I will often have them fill out a form, a questionnaire that helps them address what their goals are for the divorce process. What are their goals? Is it litigation? Is it mediation? Where do they stand there? What's their level or ability to deal with conflict? Do they feel that there is a power imbalance? Is there a concern for the children if there are children involved? There's just a number of questions that gets them to be thinking about the process itself, because the process itself has a big impact on what post-divorce life looks like too. So really getting clients centered on what are their goals for the process, and then also what are their post-divorce goals, because that's really what we're negotiating for is that life we want after divorce. So if we don't know what that looks like, or we don't have any idea what we want there, it makes the negotiation process, I believe, more difficult, because then all people are focusing on is, I just want what's fair or what I'm entitled to. Well, who gets to decide that, right? What's fair? Everybody's got usually a different idea of what fair is. And fair can change depending on the emotional temperature of the room, right? If people are getting along, fair looks different than if people aren't getting along. When it comes to what you're entitled to, I think what people really look at there is, based in the law, what am I entitled to? And certainly the law dictates a lot of that. But when you look at cases, you can take 10 different cases that are almost identical, but have different outcomes, different outcomes that you'll see with the courts. So what you're entitled to, I'm not sure that's the best place to lean. I think
Right.
leaning on what ultimately do you want your life to look like, and how can you use this divorce to build a foundation for that? That's what I encourage clients to do. So that's part of the work we do. And then, of course, when it comes to in-session work, I have clients fill out a session prep form, which asks a series of questions, which focuses them on what they're hoping to get out of our time together. Because I think it's really important that clients walk away with steps to take, even if it's just one step, but have more knowledge and more information to move the process forward.
Presumably, for the coaching side at least, you're just working with one of the divorcing spouses. You don't really ever coach both of them at the same time, right?
So the only time that I coach both spouses is typically in a co-parenting situation, when we're working on, ways to work better together for the benefit of the kids.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So, well, that brings up the next question because you do have that focus on co-parenting coaching. So, what does that look like, and how does that role differ, I guess, when you're dealing with divorce cases with children versus without children?
So my belief is that when there are children involved, if we can put the children's needs at the center of all decisions, usually you're going to have better decision making, right? Because the kids, how they are impacted by this has just a huge influence on the family as a whole. So when I'm working with couples that have kids, I really like them to get focused on what are their ultimate goals when it comes to their kids. And so what that looks like is I will often ask them, what's the divorce story you want your kids to tell? When they look back, when they're 25, 30, whatever, and they're looking back on their life with their family, what do you want their story to be when it came to this divorce? And so I try to get them to identify 3 or 4 main things that they would want. It could be, well, I want them to say that we always put them first. We kept them out of the conflict. We never put them in the middle. Usually there's themes that come out of this. Well, it's great if both parents can agree on a set of goals, right? On a set of things that they want their kids to be able to say, looking back.
Right.
But even if you can't, because sometimes I'm just working with one parent, if they can at least identify 3 or 4 things or more, that then becomes your touchstone for other decisions. It's decisions that you make during the divorce. It's decisions with regard to, how am I going to respond to my co-parent when they send over this nasty text or email? Okay, well, before I respond, I'm going to go back to what I identified that I want my kids to be able to say about their experience with the divorce.
Mm,
That kind of informs then how you're going to respond. And sometimes
right.
a no response is the best response. Also, when I'm working with parents, what I like for them to look at is the courts really only require parents going through a divorce to make decisions around custody, which is really timeshare with each
Right.
parent, right? And decision making, how the parents are going to communicate, and then whether there's a support obligation.
Mm,
And I like to get my parents to think much broader than that, because parenting is really hard, and it's really hard if you're both living under one roof, much less under 2. So really getting parents to think about, what do the kids need in each home for it to be a home and not just a place they visit?
right.
What needs to be consistent in each home? Bedtimes, morning routine, what time they get up. Those parents don't think about those things, but that's hugely important to our sleep health and our ability to function. If one parent has a laissez-faire attitude around bedtime and kids go to bed, at 10, 11 o'clock, where the other parent has a pretty strict 8 o'clock bedtime, what does that look like for the kids when they go to the parent's house that has a strict bedtime? What does that look like? Because typically what's going to happen is they're not going to be ready or able to go to bed. And now that parent's going to be angry. It's bedtime. It's bedtime here, right? But if we
Right.
talk about these things, hopefully we can get the parents to both realize that it's best if they can come to some agreement on this for the benefit of their children, because we can talk about, this is going to be the impact on your kids if you don't do this, right? But even without agreement, because differences don't have to be devastating, right? But the one parent who knows that these kids are going to be coming to them with not having a bedtime schedule, now they know that they're going to have some ritual around getting the kids back into that schedule while they're with them, and not be frustrated at the kids for acting completely normal based upon what their situation is.
Right. Okay.
So
That makes sense.
it's getting parents to figure out. Sometimes I'll use the analogy of that, recognizing that as parents, first of all, they're still a family, right? The marriage ends, the family continues, it's just restructured, just looks different. So the family is like a school, and each parent's home is like a different classroom.
Mhm.
So usually a school has a set of values, character, honesty, whatever it may be, but it's a set of school values that all of the teachers buy into and support.
Right.
But each classroom has different rules and different ways of operating, different structures, right? And when a child breaks a rule in Mrs. Smith's class, she doesn't march little Johnny over to Mr. Thomas's class and say, you need to punish him for what happened in my
Right.
class, right? If there's a violation of the school rules, then usually the teacher, will take the child to the principal, and it'll be managed there. So what I want to get parents to understand is that hopefully they can come up with a school, values that they both can support. And then in each home, they have their own individual way of doing things. So there's that unity, but also the recognition that each home is going to have some differences. But it's important to discuss and identify where you agree on things, but sometimes even more importantly, where you don't. Because where you don't agree is where you're going to have to lean in and support your kids more.
Gotcha. Again, you've got three different hats that you're wearing. So where is the overlap? Where is the distinction? Like, are you typically acting as a divorce coach role? And then obviously the co-parenting gets added on to that in the situation if they are parents. Or is there ever a scenario where you're also bringing in mediation into those mixes as well? Or do you keep that part separate?
Yeah, so as a mediator, you have to be neutral. So
Right.
so I'm not advocating for either person. I like to say that when there's children involved, that I'm actually advocating for the children in my
Right.
role as a mediator, but my role as a mediator is really to be neutral. I would say that where my coaching experience comes in as a mediator is really trying to ask questions to help people going through this process think differently about the decisions that they're going to make, to get outside of, we as mediators talk about interest versus positions, an interest being the why of things, the position being I want the house, right? A very strong position. The interest is, well, why do you want that? Let's talk more about that. So that's where my coaching skills I think come in, is helping people off those positions and to be talking about the whys. Because if we can get to why they want this, usually there's more than one way to solve that problem. So mediation is just mediation. It's a neutral role to help facilitate decision making and hopefully come to some positive outcomes. Coaching really is more of an advocacy role in terms of, when it's divorce coaching, I'm working with one client and I'm advocating for them and helping them be strategic and come to the best decisions that will serve them well in the long run.
Mhm.
And then in the co-parenting, again, if I'm working with one parent, I like to say I advocate for the kids in that role, whether I'm working with one or both.
Gotcha. Okay. Can you take on the co-parenting role or the co-parenting coach role as a mediator, or does that still even need to be completely differentiated, just because you need to stay fully neutral in that mediation role? Or is a co-parenting coach, when you're working with both, still count as a neutral role?
Yeah, so if I'm working with two parents in a co-parenting coaching space, I am neutral. I mean, I'm not advocating for one
Right.
parent or the other. I would say I'm advocating again for the child, right? So that's where my focus is helping the parents understand what the best uh, choices and ways to operate are for the benefit of the children, helping them think about things differently, giving them tools and skills to be able to use to operate in a different manner than they did as they were married, because their relationship is different, helping them reframe the relationship from that of romantic partners to that of business partners of raising their children. So it's reframing the relationship. When it comes to mediation, what I will say that's different for me and where my co-parenting experience comes in is I encourage my clients to create a comprehensive parenting plan that goes beyond just those three things that the courts require. So it's
Gotcha.
really digging in. It's talking about how are you going to set up these homes, the things that we were talking about earlier, and then many more. I've got 3 pages of items that I go through with clients to identify potential areas of conflict, things that we should be considering. They don't have to address all of them. They may say, that's not an issue for me, or I don't foresee that being an issue for us. But I help parents think broader than the way the courts will look at things.
Gotcha. Well, and you mentioned some of this related to specifically kind of shifting over to the mediation role. Are there any other go-to strategies that you like to employ, to kind of keep that effective communication going with the divorcing parties? Obviously, utilizing some of your coaching skills to make that work. Are you finding that there's other strategies that you use to kind of keep everybody level-headed?
Yeah, so my process for mediation is I have an individual meeting with each spouse for about 30 minutes. I find that that's really helpful because it gives them a space to share their concerns, maybe provide any information to me that they feel is important for me to know.
Mhm.
I also provide them with lots of information on communication, how to use I statements and non-blaming language, helping them understand what an interest versus a position is, how to communicate in ways that will de-escalate or avoid conflict, giving them resources. One resource that I use quite a bit is Biff for Co-Parents, which is a book that was written by Bill Eddy. Strongly encourage, parents, co-parents to get that book. I ask them to take a look at things, communication resources like that prior to the mediation,
Mhm.
so they're more prepared to come in with their best self and to be focused on the problem and not the person in the room. I
Right.
talk about we can't do anything about anything that's gone on in the past, so spending our time relitigating those issues probably is not worthwhile. And I let them know how I handle those situations when they come up, that I'll try to redirect, may ask to take a break. And so helping them really understand how they should be entering this mediation space, how they should be thinking about communicating, preparing, making sure that they have the information necessary to make decisions, right? Assessing where they may have a lack of knowledge, and
Mhm.
then recommending that they maybe bring another professional into the mediation, somebody like yourself,
Right.
right? Maybe a certified divorce financial analyst, somebody
Mhm.
that can help shore up where they may not have knowledge.
Perfect. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. How does that change, I guess, when there always seems to be kind of a power dynamic between divorcing spouses, and it tends to be one that's a little bit more of an imbalance in terms of negotiating skills or just their presence of trying to kind of command a little bit more of the negotiating tactics. How does that fit in, and how does that change your role as the mediator or co-parenting coach, whatever role you're going to take? What does that change in the dynamic when you're dealing with people that are not really on level playing field?
So for me, as a neutral, I just have to be asking questions, and usually in asking questions. So for instance, when it comes to the finances, because that usually tends to be a place where one person knows more. Do you understand, the information here? Is there anything that's missing? Sometimes it would be something around, would it be helpful to have somebody walk you through this information?
Right.
Do we want to bring somebody into the mediation? So it's asking people questions, which usually then ends up identifying where there is a lack of knowledge. And then at that point, asking questions around, would it be helpful if somebody was brought in to talk about this? Would it be helpful if you worked with somebody that could explain this to you better? My belief when it comes to mediation is that my job is to make sure that there's informed consent, that everybody has the information they need to make decisions and informed decisions, right? So I ask questions to try to uncover whether or not they're understanding the information that's presented, if they're comfortable making decisions. And a lot of times I'll get that information in those pre-mediation meetings. I'll get
Mhm.
a sense of, I'm not really comfortable talking about that in front of my spouse, or this makes me uncomfortable. And so sometimes we can set up that support prior to even coming into the mediation sessions. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. So, and I think you kind of hit on it before, where there are other parties to the process. We're obviously two of examples of that, where we're not the attorneys. Everybody kind of thinks of the attorney as the end all be all with divorce cases, but you mentioned CDFAs. Obviously, my role as a certified divorce lending professional. I guess where have you seen the biggest benefit by having other parties like that involved in the process? Like, have you run into that more, for yourselves, to where you've actually seen firsthand experience with that?
Absolutely. I actually think that, a CDLP, someone in your role, is critical and should be brought in at the beginning of the process if somebody has property, right? Because usually it's one of their biggest assets. And they typically don't deal with it until it's almost too late, right? Uh,
Usually.
yeah. So I think it's really important to bring someone like yourself in, because usually the house not only is it the biggest asset, but it's usually really an emotional. They've got people have emotional connections to it. And getting information around what are they going to do with the house with regard to the loan? If one person really wants it, can they even be approved for it? Can
Right.
they assume the loan? Can they refinance and take on the loan? And if they can, what do they need income wise? Because very often what we find is that maybe they're short income, because
Right.
maybe the one person who wants to stay in the house works part-time or doesn't have the income necessary to be approved for whatever mortgage they need. And if we know that coming into the process, we're much better able to create agreements that will support what that need is for approval, right? We,
Right.
we can take a look at creating support numbers that would allow that person to qualify for a mortgage. Maybe they get their support front loaded. Maybe they take support versus an asset to help create that approval process. Um, Getting that support in place ahead of time so that it's there when needed, that the track record is there of them getting that support, because they have to have it in place for a certain amount of time. All of those things, if we wait till the end, it's sometimes too late to be able to make decisions on
Right.
with regard to the house, or the best decisions for the house. And sometimes bringing someone like you into the process takes the emotion down, because then we just learn the house isn't an option. The house has to be sold. So
Right.
let's take that off the table, and now we can, put that emotion away and start dealing with the things that we have to deal with. So to me, information is the key to all of this. And there are professionals out there that have the answers for most, if not all, of the issues that come up in divorce. You just have to talk to the right professional to get the information.
Right. No, I couldn't have said it better. And I think that's the key, is just the lawyers are great at what they do, but they're not the experts in every aspect of this process. So definitely bring in other parties involved. I think that's great advice, and certainly something that we're trying to educate people about on this kind of podcast as well. So you mentioned some of the kind of early steps that people could take as they're going through a divorce, of things to kind of make the process easier. Are there any other bits of advice that you would give to somebody that's really starting down this divorce process and just trying to help them navigate everything?
Well, the first thing I would say is talk with a divorce coach. And the only reason why is because a divorce coach should be able to, again, give you a picture of the whole process, right? I think that people tend to, when they think about divorce, the first thing they need to do is, hire an attorney and serve their spouse,
Right.
right? And as you and I both know, that can create way more conflict than it needs to. And the reality of it is that at least looking into some other routes or other paths to get divorced, I think is really smart. Mediation, collaborative divorce, those are my go-tos. At any time, you can get off that train and you can litigate, right? And the reverse is true. And I think this is important for your listeners to know.
Right.
At any time you're in litigation, you can get off that train and get into mediation. But for me, mediation really can allow you, even if it's not successful, it gives you a lot of information that you can then take to your attorney if you end up litigating. It moves you a lot further down the path because you've got information on the positions that your spouse is taking, information that was shared during the mediation. It gives you a lot. And possibly even some of the filing, the legal forms that need to be filed in the individual states, some of that work can be done by mediators. It depends on what state you're in. But some of that work can be done in mediation. So it's not a complete loss if you start mediation and you have to go to litigation. So I think the first thing is to be really thoughtful around the path you choose for divorce, the steps you take. I think the most important thing is how you have that conversation with your spouse. If I could say one thing, it would be if you only work with a divorce coach to help craft that script and to plan out what that is, just meet with a divorce coach to do that.
Right.
Because how that conversation goes lays the foundation for how things play out from that point on.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfect advice. And I do like the fact that I feel like a divorce coach can kind of be that central point to kind of direct people to the right places because you know all the different roles that are involved, you know what types of divorces there are. It's not like you're just kind of funneled into an attorney that then is obviously just going to give you their somewhat biased advice, whether they're more of a litigative attorney or collaborative. At least you know how to steer them in the right path, which is perfect. So I think everybody would benefit greatly by getting somebody like yourself involved super early in the process. So I do appreciate you taking the time. If somebody would like to learn more about your services and you personally, where's the best place to look?
Best place to go is my website, and that's firststepsdivorce.com. And I spent a lot of time last year redoing it and putting it together so that there would be a lot of helpful information. I encourage everybody to check out the free resources that I have on my site and use them, because I think even if you just go there, hopefully there's stuff there that will help you have a better process.
Right. Well, this has been hugely valuable. I really appreciate you taking the time, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. All right. Take care.